High art has great moral complexity, but is usually not known for its plot. Think of the classic novels. Very insightful, but kind of a slog. Whereas low art usually has a great exterior-based plot, no moral complexity. This show merges both of those aspects. And basically, our thesis today is explaining the techniques of how Better Call Saul accomplishes that. So the main feeling that pervades this final season is the feeling of endgame. And the reason I bring that up specifically is most shows attempt to do that, but fail. I'm thinking about Game of Thrones, where it tried to have that final ratchet up of tension to make you feel like, oh, the end is near, but it did not quite. Cody and I have this expression when we talk about shows ending. We talk about shows landing the plane. And Game of Thrones, it was more like the Hindenburg. It was not a successful landing of the plane. So let's start off by talking about the techniques of how it gives you that feeling of endgame. The easiest way to make your ending have the feeling of endgame is to bring back a lot of the elements that you were juggling around in the first part of your story and put them all in a row and tie a nice bow on it. You're putting all the second brackets on the parentheses. You opened up the parentheses, and then maybe certain storylines had tiny parentheses where it made you think, oh, this is the end of that storyline. But really they were embedded in these other brackets that you're now seeing come to fruition in these final times. So for instance, you thought the Kettlemans arc was over in season 1. That felt like a nice story that was wrapped up with a bow. It had an ending. Well, surprise, they play an instrumental role in this endgame part of the show as part of Kim and Jimmy's, now Saul's, mystery plan. The same thing happens with Davis and Maine. I think we've only had tangential interactions with Davis and Maine since season 2, but now they bring it back fully, also as part of the mystery plan. The same thing is true of Mesa Verde's Kevin Wachtel. He's obviously been a regular throughout the entire show, but they bring him back for a brief instant to, just give you that feeling of closure. We may not even be done with him yet. We don't know. The same is true of, in season 4, we were introduced to, as Lalo pronounces it, Werner Ziegler. We were introduced to him, and we thought that story was over in season 4, but then Lalo ties that into his scheme, going to visit Werner's widow in Germany. So you can see, they're putting all these aspects that were introduced in the first 5 seasons of the show, and now they're putting them all in a row and tying them together. And all of that gives this final season like the curtain's coming. The feeling of endgame that we talk about. So this isn't the only technique that they use to give it the feeling of endgame, but it's one of the main ones that I noticed.
Quick break for some capitalism, then back to the show.
We're really excited to announce that we have a sponsor now. Our sponsor is Arc Studio. All right, so this is from Arc Studio. When it's time to write, you need to be able to focus on the words and nothing else. Arc Studio understands how screenwriters think. They've created screenwriting software that doesn't distract with an overloaded interface. Say goodbye to archaic, outdated screenwriting software and hello to advanced story building features, industry standard automatic formatting, and stress-free collaboration tools that are as easy to use as Google Docs. Arc Studio is already used by beginners and professionals alike, such as the team behind the Netflix show Arcane and David Wayne, writer-director of Wet Hot American Summer and Role Models. Join the thousands of screenwriters who have already made the leap. Arc Studio offers a completely free plan, and you can also get $30 off on the Pro plan if you visit the link in the show notes or arcstudiopro.com/deconstructed. I repeat, for $30 off, visit arcstudiopro.com/deconstructed. So yeah, guys, they were nice enough to give us a discount code. So if you want discount on industry standard, top of the line screenwriting software, check out that link in the description if you're on YouTube or wherever else makes sense, depending on what platform you are listening to this on. If you are listening to this on cassette tape that you've dug out of the ruins of civilization in the year 3000,
I weep for you.
Yes, thank you for finishing that joke. We're really happy to be working with Arc Studio. I actually reached out to them to work with us because I'm a fan of their product. I use it. It's actually really great software. So we're really happy to be partnering with them. Okay, back to the regular content.
The final technique that I have identified that gives it the feeling of endgame is the big questions of the show are starting to be answered. Because, like, what are the big questions of the show? How does Jimmy McGill become Saul Goodman? Now, we've had a slow rolling out of that. And by the time we reach season 6, like, he's almost fully in character. Like, I even noticed it down to his walk, his gait. I call it the sleaze gait, where he has that, like, swagger. I noticed it when he was going into what was eventually revealed to be the boxing ring. He had a very specific posture and walk that he had that's like so, like, it's so typically Saul, but you didn't even notice that was a Saul characteristic until it's like we haven't been seeing Jimmy do that for the whole show, and finally he's bringing it back here. So, like, the final aspects of Jimmy McGill are being killed in this final season to have him become Saul Goodman fully. Because, I mean, the way we're introduced to Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad is Jesse and Walt kidnap him and take him out to the desert, and they say, get him off without a deal with the DA or we'll kill you. And Saul's first thing is, why are you threatening to kill me? Why not just kill Badger? Like, what a cynical thing to say. Because everyone has that voice in your head that's like, yeah, don't go full cynic. The first blow was Chuck's betrayal and his death. And now with Howard's death, we're starting to see, like, how that part of him dies. The same is true in terms of, like, how did Mike and Gus have the partnership that they have? Because they've been pretty antagonistic throughout the majority of Better Call Saul. It's only now that we're starting to see their relationship start to click and become what it is in Breaking Bad. So the big questions of the show are finally, they're not fully answered yet, like they shouldn't be. It's only the first half of the season. But we're starting to get the sense it's like, now it's going to be fully answered.
Theme is kind of a quagmire to, like, think about too much and talk about too much and analyze too much, because it's really, especially when you're writing and you're constructing a story, it's really easy to, like, get caught in trying to get your themes to feel like you want them to feel, to the detriment of everything else in your story, as opposed to, like, letting them arise naturally. And then it can make your story feel kind of artificial if you're starting from theme and building out. And most writers don't think about theme too much. I guarantee the Better Call Saul writers are not, that's not a starting place for them. They're not sitting down and going, all right, what's our theme? How can we make sure it fits the theme that we're going for? They're just writing plot, and then whatever theme arises. So it is a little bit dangerous, I think, to analyze from a theme first perspective. But I think it can be more helpful to pivot to that perspective a little bit more so in a final season scenario or towards the end. That's when it can start to make sense to pose those questions to yourself of, like, to go back and read what you've already written, to go back and watch what you've already created and go, okay, what's the themes? What are the themes here? And how can we bring these home and put a dot on them?
Yes. In our El Camino podcast and Better Call Saul podcast part 1, we touched a little bit on what is the unique Vince Gilligan tone? What are the elements that make something a Vince Gilligan piece? And thinking back to Breaking Bad, I've thought about one particular moment that I think can be used as a microcosm of Vince Gilligan's tone. He is excellent at hitting archetypal story beats, but adding a little bit of absurdity and comedy to it. So it has this strange contrast of light and dark simultaneously. And in Breaking Bad, the moment that I'm zeroing in on is when his brother-in-law, Hank, is just, like, showing him for a laugh. Like this video of Gail Bedecker singing the 1980s version of Major Tom at a karaoke bar in, like, Thailand. And it's super goofy. And Hank's just showing it to Walt, like, hey, look at this goofball who I think is this guy I've been chasing forever. But what's really happening there is the archetypal dark realization moment.
Anagnoresis.
Yes, an artist we love named Film Cow, Jason Steele, he parodies this moment all the time as the, oh shit, moment. So while this absurd video is being played on the TV, that has ramifications to Walt that are sinking in to his pores. And he's sitting there like, whoa. So it has this strange contrast of energies where to Hank and Walt Jr., this video is just pure comedy. But to Walt, like, Like, it feels like the walls are closing in, like, oh shit.
Yes.
Like, this is a horrible development to my life right now. And Vince Gilligan does this all the time. And the writers of Better Call Saul, I know Vince Gilligan wasn't always directly involved in every Better Call Saul writing decision in the same way he was with Breaking Bad, but they have been able to successfully imitate it in this show. For instance, like, one of my favorite scenes in Better Call Saul is, it's one of the first scenes of season 3. And like, it's the archetypal, you're being shown the consequences of your actions scene. And the core of the scene is he lied his way onto this Air Force base so he could get a shot of this B-29 plane with a fake war veteran in front of it for one of his sleazy commercials. And with a lot of his other schemes, like, he just deceives people, and that's kind of the end of it. But this is one of those moments when he's messed with the wrong guy, and then the Air Force captain shows up to his office. So it's a really serious moment because, like, the guy's accusing him of going onto government property under false pretenses, and he's going to sue them for stolen valor and all these other charges. So it's a really serious scene. But in the middle of it, there's this moment where Jimmy goes, and what harm was done? Hey, the Air Force base is still there, the B-52, B-29. What? B-29? Fifi's a B-29. And then Jimmy's just taken aback and kind of laughs. And then the guy goes, oh, I guess this is just one big joke to you. It's like, you just said the sentence, Fifi's a B-29. I have a dozen moments of this. Like at the beginning of season 2, when Price, who's the guy who hires Mike as a bodyguard for the drug trade, he's in this insane like Hummer with rims spinning. And like Mike doesn't want to get in the car because it's too flamboyant. And Price just goes, this is the gravy train and it's taking off the station. So let's go. Or it's like this serious moment, but they introduce these like moments of absurdity and levity. This next one's from season 5. It's the scam where Saul keeps, because now Jimmy's Saul keeps coming up with these reasons to delay Acker's eviction, the guy whose house they want to bulldoze to make way for the call center. And he keeps pulling these schemes, and the sheriff keeps having that line, I need to make a call. And it's like a very intentional, like comedic thing that they keep bringing back. One of the best ones from season 6 is when they bring back the Kettlemans, and Betsy Kettleman is obviously like she's the dagger, like she's the one that's really going after it. And then the fucking husband, like she's like really going after it. It's like you used our good name to besmirch Howard Hamlin, and then Craig Kettleman with his eyes slanted upward, giving us cuck face. He just goes, yeah, and we're mad. Because I have a feeling, based on the way these actors are not good at timing, that they're not comedic actors. But they're taking these like classically Shakespearean trained actors and making them do comedy randomly throughout dramatic scenes. And all of this stuff is like mixed together. And if I had to sum up the Vince Gilligan tone, I think that's it. I think that's what he's going for. Because obviously he takes us to some really dark moments. But this is one of the funniest dramatic shows on TV, both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Yes.
And there's two halves to that. There's the dramatic and the absurdity that are being married. And one thing that does in mixing those is it helps, as to use your term, it helps release the cliches from their baggage. So obviously the danger of dabbling in archetype, or the danger of moving more towards the archetypal side of the spectrum, is falling into cliche and having things be tropey. And so it's a way to help to break out of those tropes just fairly effortlessly, if you can just find the absurd specificity in it. That's the combination of words I would put together. Absurd specificity. It's always like he finds some weird specific quirk and then elevates that to dominate the entire moment.
Yes. Vince Gilligan is the master of this, taking story beats that we've all seen and through his own unique style, having us feel the drama in those moments. This story has a save the cat moment where the hero does something to endear the audience to them. In episode 2 of season 1, the whole show, he negotiates with Tuco to save the 2 skateboarders who he had no reason to save because like they conned him, and then they were the ones who talked and put Jimmy in the situation. So that endears us to him. And it also, we talked about this in a prior podcast, where a great scene layers goals. So not only does it endear us to Jimmy, but it shows he is really a talented lawyer. He's not a fraud in that respect.
Yes.
He's actually really talented, that he got this guy he's talking to a guy who's purely working on the lizard brain level.
Yeah.
And is able, through charisma and sleaze and tact, to, like, the guy was going to kill them. He was going to do Colombian neckties where he slits their throat and pulls their tongues out, and he negotiates them. He negotiates them down to just breaking their legs, one leg each. That's talent. Like, how many times have you seen a save the cat moment? But this one was amazing. How many times have you seen the dark realization moment? Breaking Bad's was amazing. This is the Vince Gilligan tone.
Yes, and like I said a second ago, there's two halves of it. There's finding the absurd specificity and elevating it so that it dominates the scene. So that's the comedy half. But then there's the drama half, and that is also just as important. Comedy is all about specificity. One way to look at the spectrum of storytelling is, we've talked about this before, charm film on one side, epic on the other. You can give different terms to those poles. Those are just different names for archetypal and specific. Those are the same words for different things. And you're always on that spectrum all the time. And so part of this Vince Gilligan tone that we're talking about is marrying those two sides. So you have to have both elements. And you have to have not just both elements, but a very high and excellent manifestation of both elements. And so we've just spent the last few minutes exploring how to get a high and excellent manifestation of the comedic side. But the way to get the high and excellent manifestation of the dramatic side is in many ways the opposite. So comedy is all about specificity. Drama is all about archetype, which in many ways is the opposite of specificity. That's one of the ways that comedy and drama are opposed to each other naturally. And so the way that you bring drama to its fullest height, or one of the ways, an aspect of how you do that, is to find the highest and grandest and most primordial embodiment of the archetype that you're trying to represent. And so you have coined this term, the dream image technique.
Do you remember what George R.R. Martin said was the impetus for A Song of Ice and Fire? What was the thing that inspired him?
Oh, yeah. It was that suddenly he had the image pop into his head of the Stark family coming across the direwolf pups in the woods.
Yes, with the dead mother nearby.
Yes.
And just that image, that scene of the Stark family stumbling upon newly orphaned direwolf pups.
There was one line, too, by the way, that really stuck out, which he talks about, which is this in the summer snows.
Yes.
It was this whole picture, right? The pups, the dead mother, snow on the ground, but it's still kind of warm in the air. It's like it paints a whole atmospheric picture, which all congeals into what you call a dream image.
Yes. From that sole dream image, the entire saga of A Song of Ice and Fire stemmed out of it. This technique of imagining your scene as a dream image frozen in time right before the moment of highest tension in the scene is the technique you can use to check or create good scenes. If the word's dream image is too abstract for you to have it resonate with you, another way you can think about it is, I've been to a lot of museums, and when I see a statue or a painting that's really compelling to me, it's always depicting a dramatic moment right before the moment of highest tension. So for instance, one of my favorite statues of all time, I saw it when I was in Greece. It's a statue of Paris giving the golden apple to Aphrodite.
We talk about this all the time with The Far Side.
Yes.
This is one thing The Far Side is amazing at. Like, it's not just funny, it's like dramatically masterful, and that Gary Larson is always capturing exactly what you're talking about, the moment of highest drama. There's an implication in every panel of a whole story that has unfolded up to this moment and that will continue to unfold after this moment. And he has captured the moment of culmination of that story. So the one thing that I don't necessarily love about this particular articulation of this technique is that it's hard to reproduce. It's like you either have the instinct for that or you don't, right? It's like you either have the instinct for having those dream images pop into your head or you don't. It's kind of hard to...
Sure. So explaining the tool is one thing, but if you want to try to train this part of your brain, one thing you can do is watch movies and see if you can do that with every scene. Now, to be clear, there are a lot of movies where you're not going to be able to do that for every scene because, frankly, some writers just... Like, look, I'm going to say something that maybe is controversial. I think you should be able to do this technique for literally every scene. And I think Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad are proof that if you do it for literally every scene, it pays off manifold. Like there's just no comparison to anything else. But look, maybe you don't want to do that. And like, yeah, some scenes you just got to get exposition out. So maybe you don't do this for every scene.
So just to be clear here, though, because every scene has a moment of highest tension. Literally all, right, by definition, all scenes have a moment of highest tension. So it's not just, is there a moment of highest tension? It's can you take that moment and elevate it higher by finding the most archetypal manifestation of that moment?
Yes.
And the way that it wraps it all together, like, and to try to get it all into one moment, as opposed to maybe stringing out its elements across multiple scenes or multiple moments.
Right.
This most recent episode, the mid-season finale, semi-finale, was proof to me that they actually think in these terms. That it's not just, this isn't just outside analysis. The writers actually think this way in the writer's room. And to me, the proof was the scene with the final scene of the last episode, the mid-season finale, episode 7, season 6, the last scene. And here's my proof. It is not an inherently visually exciting scene. It's just in their apartment, right? And it's the same setup that they already had at the end of last season, which is Jimmy and Kim alone in their apartment at night, and somebody comes in. And it's, of course, at the end of last season, it's Lalo. And so that alone had a drama to it because it's like, oh, we've never seen those three characters alone in the same room together before. So that alone kind of had its own magic. In this episode, they didn't want to just do that again because they kind of already expended a little bit of that magic. So they found a way to bring it to bring out that thing, the dream image. And what they chose was they had a little micro objective correlative. It doesn't always have to be an objective correlative, but in this particular instance it was, of the candle. They chose to focus our attention on the candle 2 times. The first time is Howard. You know, the implication, of course, is that his body is occluding the natural flow of air, and that causes the candle to waver a little bit. When he walks in, we see the candle waver a little bit, and you're like, okay, just a little setup, little plant. And then we see the candle waver again a couple minutes later. And of course, immediately terror is stricken into our hearts because why should the candle be wavering again? And they found a way to make walking into a room hyper dramatic, right? Like they could have just showed him walk into the room. That would have been the dummy like the easy version that anybody could have done. Just point the camera at the actor as he walks. Okay. Is there a way you can bring that moment to its highest culmination? And the best, I think in this particular case, they're like, well, that's the best we can think of. We can bring in this objective correlative to kind of really turn that up to a 10. It doesn't always have to be like that. It doesn't always have to be, you know, a cinematographic execution. But that to me was proof that they do in fact think in these terms, right? Like they were thinking that like we need a thing here.
And if you boil down the drama of this scene, it's that there's not supposed to be another person that shows up, and yet there is. And the showing up of that fourth person is summarized in the moment when he walks in and the candle flickers. So if you just showed nothing else except a still frame of the camera flickering, that would imply all of the drama of the scene.
Yes.
I feel like this idea that we're talking about right now is getting at something really important, but I can hear some of people listening to this, and I can hear them going, what the fuck are these guys on about? This makes no sense. How is this different than just, like, how does this arrive at a different outcome than just writing the same thing that you would have written and then just taking a snapshot of 1 second from 1 moment from each scene? Like, this is different than that, but how can we articulate that? And I think a useful thing to do might be to take a few moments from Better Call Saul where they do this really well and give counterexamples where how would lesser writers not using this technique have written that moment?
Sure. So you touched on that with Lalo's entrance. Yeah, a lesser writer would have just showed him walking into the room.
But that is not a writing choice that was made. To be clear, the reason that's not the best possible example to give is because that was not a writing choice that was made. That was a directing choice. That was a cinematography choice, right? So on the page, it probably didn't. Maybe it mentioned the candle on the page, but probably not. That was probably there's nothing different between the two versions in the way it was written, only in the way it was shot, right? So can we find an example in the writing? How would it be different on the page?
Right. I mean, an example that pops in my head is at the end of season 4, when Mike essentially has to tell Werner, it's like,
yes,
you're not getting a second chance you're going to die right here. And then does the thing where they walk out into the desert and you see that shot from far away. And then you just see, right?
Yes. Okay, this is a good example. Yes. Yes.
He has that moment where he just looks up and he says, there are so many stars. I will go look at them.
It almost felt like an homage to
the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
Yes. There's almost an identical moment at the end of that movie where it's like, oh, that painting there, that picture looks dusty. I'll go take a closer look, knowing that Robert Ford is going to shoot him.
Because like a lesser writer, like, I don't know, he would have just like shot him in the face, like right there.
Yes, they find what is the most dramatic circumstances and mood under which Werner could die. They started with the ending in mind. They started with how can we make this moment feel as significant as possible? And part of that feeling is captured in the shot, and just the cinematography of that far shot, the stars and the silhouettes. But that is only a visual representation of the emotions that were at play, that were all on the page and the way it was written. So a couple things. First of all, he did... And we got to have a name for this technique because this is a trope in TV and storytelling of the, like, I never loved you, the Tyrion Shay, like, get away from me to protect you. Yes. Yeah. Being mean to your significant other in order to save them.
Yes.
Right. So he did that to his wife. So that feels horrible because you see him ruining his relationship with his wife, or not necessarily ruining it, but being the last words he's ever going to speak to her is he's being a dick, and that feels like it makes you yearn for catharsis that will never happen. Right, so he's dying under those circumstances. The mood right before it of the scenes immediately preceding it was very lighthearted and jocular. He's in his Hawaiian shirt, belly out in the pool, having a grand old time. So there's this juxtaposition of tones and mood of, he's like, oh, Michael, everything is fine. It's good. Okay, we go back now. And he's like, no. So it's like that heavy juxtaposition. So there's like all these, I'm sure you can probably identify more, but all these things stacked up together all add up into this mood of terrible realization when he realizes he's going to die, and Mike has to carry this horrific burden of killing his friend. All of those things are at play and make the moment of the killing, it's not just, oh, another person dies. All of those feelings are coming to a head.
Yes. And I mean, a lot of that is because they did the work, because that moment would have been less believable had Werner not screwed up earlier by drawing the schematic of the place when he got drunk at the bar. So that was like strike one. And then this was strikes 2, 3, and 5.
So it's the classic technique of just having multiple threads culminate in the same moment. Like a big part of what makes a moment dramatic is that you're conflicted about it. You have many feelings about it. It's not just one feeling.
If you only took that dream image and contrasted it with the beginning of the relationship, it's almost like the dramatic threads of how you get from point A to point B are nearly self-evident. Because think about what is embedded in that dream image.
Yes.
Like, it's Mike and Werner in the desert under the stars. So something was fucked up. They're never in the desert. Werner's in the lab. He's never in the desert. So something is wrong. Werner is facing away from Mike. So there's like a sort of like acceptance and like Mike doesn't want him to look at him while he kills him. All of that tension is embedded in that dream images. So I would not be shocked if they worked backwards from the conclusion where they're like, we want to get here. What work do we have to do to have this dream image have the most mythological resonance?
It's really difficult to predict these plots. But once you see the dream image that they were shooting for, then retroactively, you can see why they made all the decisions they made. It's like, oh yeah, it was actually very linear. Each one of those things was actually pretty fucking linear. They just did the three. It's like, in order for it to feel bad for Mike, like if we know why it feels bad for Werner, he's dying. Why does it feel bad for Mike? Well, that's simple. In order for it to feel bad for Mike, you have to make them friends. And so you have to see them bond. So you have to have 3 scenes, that's 3 beats, where they are a little bit friends, then more friends, then more friends. And you just have to have a little arc there. So it's like, great, we'll have 3 little beats where we create a mini arc of them becoming friends, so that when he has to kill his friend, it feels bad, etc.
And you know what I realize? This technique is the opposite of analyzing symbolism. We all have learned how to analyze symbolism in like literature class. If you were to take a lit student and have them analyze the symbolism of that final shot where Werner dies, it's a very particular shot, laden with mood, that does such a great job of conjuring those powerful feelings in us. there's all sorts of symbolism that we could traditionally read into that particular cinematographic choice, right? Everybody's practiced this a million times in high school and college. Oh, the wide shot creates a sense of distance, and that's meant to reflect the feeling that in that moment, Mike they both feel alienated, alone. Just previously, they had been friends. Werner had felt close to his wife. They had felt close to each other. Werner had felt close to his men, but suddenly in that moment, they felt distant and alienated. There's a million ways that you could make a very typical lit crit analysis of that. And neither of us are very big subscribers to like lit crit, and that we don't talk about that. We don't talk about meaning and symbolism and what the deeper layers of meaning are and things, because we don't find it particularly useful as a writer. But this technique is very much the opposite of that. All of that symbolic meaning that a person analyzing that shot might read into it, all that where that meaning is really coming from, it's not intrinsic in the shot itself. A wide shot doesn't intrinsically have all of those emotions, right? Wide shots get used all the time, and they don't have that particular set of emotions every time they get used. What's actually happening when you're quote unquote analyzing the symbolism in that shot is you are reading into that shot all of the emotion that had been established on a writing level up to that point, right? All of those feelings have been created by the writers through the meticulous setups that led to that moment of Werner having to manufacture an artificial argument with his wife and Mike having to betray his friendship with Werner. All of these writing things that got set up all culminated in that shot. And so we read all of that emotion and meaning into that shot when it's not actually intrinsically there. But it is a good choice of shot to help reflect all of that meaning that had been created. And so that is the essence of this technique is, as a writer, if you're trying to piece by piece create all of that stuff, that's a lot of stuff happening, and it's complex, and it can be difficult to put all of those pieces into place to arrive at that emotion. So the helpful technique is, instead of trying to build it up one brick at a time and hope you arrive at that meaningful end state, can you imagine the end state? Can you picture that shot and all of the feelings, the cocktail of feelings that accompany it, and then reverse engineer the plot points that got you to those feelings? Because a lot of times it is possible to have an intuition for those culminating moments, even if you can't necessarily see immediately all the individual pieces that led to them. That's the essence of this technique. And imagining it all summed up in an image makes it easier to hold on to and have an intuition for, but also fosters the good writing practice and technique of having simultaneous culmination of all these threads, as opposed to having them culminate, one at a time, less impactfully.
Yes. Now, just to put a bow on this point, because maybe to the audience, what it sounds like is, what you should do is have like one super intense dream image that you're shooting for, and then like all the stuff that's leading up to it does not need to have that like archetypal resonance. But my argument, and I think Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad are the manifestation of this, like every scene has a dream image. So like even the scene where it's Werner's first warning, like that is an archetypal moment. Like I shall never do it again. Like that is like a moment that we've all seen before, like the first slip up, and it's like, and Mike really like tells him, it's like, you fucked up bad, and like you don't know how bad, and do I have to explain to you the ramifications of this if you do it again? And he's like, no, you don't. I understand. Like that is in and of itself like can be a dream image.
Yes.
Like you could conceive of it as like, if I were to put it in a statue, you could see Werner's distraught face as Mike holds out the schematic on the coaster to him. Like that could be the dream image for that scene, right?
Yes. And this ties into what we were talking about earlier with the way they structure their scenes. This is another example of proof that this is in fact how Vince Gilligan and his team of writers thinks explicitly, is they intentionally structure their episodes around these images. One of the things that's really fascinating about this show and this entire universe in general is how consistently they reuse the same techniques. They have a handful of techniques that they just use over and over and over and over again. And it feels amazing every time because they're so powerful and they're so good at using them. We talked about the mystery plan last episode. Here's another one. They do this in almost every episode in Breaking Bad and in this show, where the episode will start on the shot of something and you don't fully understand what the significance of that thing is. But you later find out at the end of the scene, or maybe at the end of the episode, that shot was instrumental to the dream image that defined that episode or defined the scene. So an example is, I'm going to Breaking Bad because it's the first one that pops in my head. Season 2 of Breaking Bad. The cold open of every episode is scooping the pink bear out of the swimming pool. We don't know what the fuck that means until the end when the plane crashes. And that's the dream image that they were building to the whole, but they are referencing it in microcosm, hinting at it, getting us ready for it, building up its archetypal resonance at the beginning of every episode. Another one is the tarantula from Breaking Bad crawling, and then that's, of course, leading up to Todd shooting the boy.
Yes. And I mean, they use this technique so often. I mean, in episode 3 of season 6, it's the thing with the glass shard, where you see a glass shard covered in blood, and then you realize it's a shard that Nacho took to stab Juan Bolsa, so that way he can get his gun and then commit suicide.
And often what it is, to get even more specific, is that opening shot will be the aftermath of the scene. So it's it's not the dream image itself, it's the aftermath of the dream image. It's the fragments as it's laying on the ground. It's the shard of glass on the ground. And then we see what led up to that. So that the stereotypical Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad episode, it starts on a dream image that represents the aftermath of the culmination of the central drama or the highest drama of that episode. So this is a tiny bit different because the dream image is of the aftermath as opposed to the moment of highest drama, but it's still a summation of that drama. And then it ramps up and ramps up. We arrive at the dream image, which is a culmination of multiple threads. A dramatic turning point happens, and then the aftermath connects it back to that first shot. They use this constantly.
You can explain storytelling to a child, like we just talked about the dream image technique. You can explain that same technique to a child by saying, you need to make moments that go,
right.
Like that's
the trailer sound.
It's the same. Yeah. That's right. It's just like, it's like, hey, like, I'm going to do a story now in phonemes. It's just like, and that's a story. Cody, I think this needs to be our last episode. I can't explain storytelling better than that.
Well, thanks for all the good times over the years, everybody. We sail off into the sunset.
All right. Yeah, this technique, this is a great way to either come up with scenes, like the drama of scenes, or to you can check in hindsight. It's like, can I do this with my scenes? And if you can't do it, I would argue you need to rewrite the scenes. Now, some writers are going to say you don't need to do this for every scene. Some scenes you just got to get exposition out. I implore the audience, do this for every scene. It really makes a difference. If you don't believe me, like Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad, they use it every time, and it makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. Another aspect of storytelling that makes something quintessentially Vince Gilligan is he loves to take characters who start out in purely archetypal form, and by putting them through trauma and stress, have them ascend to higher levels of consciousness. In Breaking Bad, the best example of this is Hank Schrader. I think Vince Gilligan describes him in the original pilot script as an asshole jock. If you had to sum up Hank Schrader in a sound, it'd be he does that all the time.
George Bush?
Well, no. George Bush is it's like more nasally. Whereas like Hank is more like, it's more like let your beer belly hang out. It's like, like he makes like a crass joke and then he does that and chuckle under his breath. Maybe you can do it better than I can.
Probably not.
But then through his PTSD that he gets through killing Tuco and the depression he gets after being, almost left paralyzed by the assassination attempt by the cousins.
Yes, and he hits literally rock bottom.
Yeah, he hits literal rock bottom by having an obsession with minerals. Finally, by the end of the show, in season 5, he's fully manifesting the hero archetype, which is not something that he would have been able to do in his arc at the beginning of the show. Like, he was a quote-unquote hero, he was a DEA agent, but he wasn't the most likable character. Whereas, by the time we reach his death scene in Breaking Bad, it's almost like Homerian. Like, this could be in like the Iliad or the Odyssey, his death scene. And in Better Call Saul, I think the manifestation of this is Howard Hamlin. Because at first he's just like the sleazebag lawyer who wants to charm everyone with cheese and a smile. Where he, like, hey, I'm your lawyer, Howard Hamlin. Like, but through the trauma he experiences feeling guilt over Chuck's death, like, he's ascending to a higher level of consciousness where he's able to finally start to see through Jimmy's cons in a way that perhaps he wouldn't have because he was a little more naive at the beginning of the show. This is something Vince Gilligan does all the time. Put archetypal images through trauma and have them ascend to higher levels of consciousness.
Yeah, definitely. That's a pretty good amount of stuff. Should we wrap it up for this one?
I talked about this metaphor earlier in the podcast about landing the plane. And with a lot of shows, it's nip and tuck as to whether they're going to land the plane. Because, there are a lot of shows that I like where there are sections of it that are just bad, and it puts doubt into your mind on whether or not they're going to successfully end the show in a satisfying way. Experiencing the golden age of television has been like the opening sequence of Saving Private Ryan, where we're all running up Omaha Beach and like our friends are dying horrific deaths around us. We look to the side. For a lot of people, the first one was Lost, where it's like, oh my God, I invested so much time in this and it sucked. And it's like your buddy Paul like blows up. It's like, no, Paul. And then over here, it's like, no, Dexter. I love Dexter. And over here, it's like, How I Met Your Mother, no. And then like, it's like your best friend is like ahead of you. It's like, no, not Game of Thrones! It's like 9/11, and it just like explodes in fashion. And you just like collapse on the beach. You're clutching your head and like ripping out your hair like, no! You're like traumatized. And then out of the smoke and the rubble, you're sitting there defeated. A shadow walks towards you with a calming voice. Hey, what's going on? And you're like weeping like, I want to be with them. Take me to them. I don't want to live anymore. And the smoke clears, and it's Bob Odenkirk, and he puts his hand on your shoulder. It's like, I got you, buddy. We're going to get you to the top of this beach. It's like, I can't handle another loss, Bob. I know, but you don't need to worry about that. And he just picks you up and he takes you, he pats you on the back and you walk to over the horizon of Omaha Beach. Cause like this show, it's going to be perfect. I have no doubt in my mind that they're going to land the plane because they made it good the whole way through. I have no reason to doubt the success. The one snag was when Bob Odenkirk had that heart attack that freaked everyone the fuck out. Because we had a phone call and we're like, of course this is how it ends. They were gonna land the plane. The script was perfect, but you can't do Better Call Saul without Bob Odenkirk. So Bob, if you're listening, by living, you have redeemed mankind. I just want to tell you that.
Well, the only thing they can stop it now is Putin.
Yeah, if Putin launches the nukes, that's the only way we don't get to see the plane landing. So, yeah, they're going to land the plane. I'm fully confident. I have full faith in the writers. I can't wait, man.
Yeah, same. It's going to be great. And this will usher in a new golden age for humanity.
That's right. And we're going to be here in the aftermath to analyze more techniques for you.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to have another episode on Better Call Saul that's going to come out in a couple weeks where we are going to go into depth on the plotting techniques that they use to construct plots that are simultaneously really satisfying, but also so hard to predict. They're using some really specific techniques in addition to just the mystery plan, which we've already discussed. And we're going to have a whole other episode that's going to go in depth on that. And it's also going to include our predictions. We're going to synthesize all of this stuff we've been talking about and make our predictions for what's going to happen in these final 6 episodes. So we'll see you guys soon for that.